Okay, we ready? So first of all, I want to take off my hat to Dr. Rosen and the Neshamos team, Maren Chavivenu, and the Neshamos. It's an honor to be part of this powerful team that are literally changing lives, uplifting lives, saving lives at every possible level. I see so many people going to you guys for support and getting the support they need and getting their lives on track. The one Neshama is an entire world. How much more so? How many more neshamas have come through and been helped? And it is a bracha to be involved with neshamas and to see all the life saving work and the critical work you guys are doing. And you've really hit the topic head on. On today, no one needs reminders how many young people have passed since Pesach alone. We've had so many tragedies, young people, Levias, and one is too many is beyond tragic. How much more so? The many that we've seen, but with all the tragedies that we've seen, we have no idea how many tragedies didn't happen because we were there for them, because we reached out, because we cared, because we saw somebody who was struggling and we said hi, we smiled, we asked them how they're doing. You'll never know the power of a positive word, a hug, a word, a compliment, a word of encouragement. It's priceless. So unfortunately, we only see the tragedies, but I can assure you that the lives that have been saved, the lives have been uplifted, lives have been moved by those people, those of you, those of us that are aware and pay attention and really make a point of giving that little extra love and attention and embrace to someone who looks like they're struggling, somebody who looks like they might be down, even if they don't look like they're down. Just being there, being positive, being a supportive person in someone's life. You really have no idea. You might be saving a life every time you do that, literally. So this event tonight is of absolute critical importance, cannot be underplayed at all. And I want to thank Rabbi Chaim Lazaroff, who's here from Houston, Texas. He's a program director of Chabad Lubavitch of Texas and the co-director of Chabad of Uptown YJP Houston. Leads a fast-growing Anash Kehillah. He runs the Houston Community Mikveh and answers halachic questions across Texas. As a certified instructor of mental health first aid, he has trained over 400 community leaders, rabbis, rebbitzins, and lay people in suicide prevention and mental health awareness. We, you know, this is what we need to do today. Rabbi Lazaroff is literally creating leaders of people that are preventing tragedies. But rather than focus on preventing tragedies, tonight we need to focus on enhancing each other's lives. Rather than prevention, let's focus on the cure, which is avos chinam. Just loving people for the sake of loving people and being there and embracing. And even if the person looks like they're a bria alma, that there's no other reason to love them other than the fact that they exist, may that be a very, very positive reason to exist. So it's an honor to introduce Rabbi Chaim Lazaroff, and may this pula uplift many, many, countless lives and have the ultimate effect of bring the gula. Thank you.
Thank you, Faglin.
Sure.
Great to be here with you and with everyone else. Um, I just want to, first of all, thanks for that introduction. Just to make it pretty clear that today is not a mental health first aid course. That's something that I do. And kind of to give it all context, I'll explain how I got here and why I do what I do. So, Mental Health First Aid is a national organization that trains people in mental health conditions. It's an 8-hour course, and I took it a number of years ago at the encouragement of the local JFS, Jewish Family Service, and it really changed the way I do my work as a shliach in Houston, being much more aware of people's sensitivities, why they were behaving the way they were behaving, understanding signs and symptoms of challenges and problems. And then, as somebody from the Kehillah died from an accidental overdose, and someone else died from suicide, and another young person died from suicide, I felt like I had to do my part to change the situation. And so I began to teach mental health first aid on behalf of the Jewish Family Service as an instructor. The whole team of people that got together to try to fight suicide in Houston, Texas. And then during COVID, was no longer able to be taught in person. And then they came up with a curriculum to teach it online. And I began teaching it online. And very quickly, I realized that I can teach online. Anybody can join. And to rabbi, it's shluchim and shluchas, rabbis and rebbitzins from across the nation would immediately join all these trainings. And Baruch Hashem, we've trained many people, whether online or in person, since. It's definitely not what I do. I do it because I feel like, as you, Mary Faglin, that this is a critical thing that we must provide for our communities that seem to be struggling so much with all of these things. So usually I make it somewhat interactive. Baruch Hashem, we have a large group here tonight. And but I would like those, if you don't mind. It's hard for me to speak to a empty screen. If you don't mind, responding when I ask questions and put things in the chat and respond to the questions that are here, so I know that there's actually people out there that are listening. That'll be really appreciated. Um, really, when we talk about suicide prevention, suicide is the end of the rope. Suicide is already that everything has been lost, and now the person doesn't know what they can do anymore, and they've lost all hope. And so the only outcome they have, or they feel that they have, is suicide. Now the truth is that imagine if we can do what's called the upstream model, which is rather than be fighting suicide, we can become aware of what people are going through so that earlier on we can stop the worsening of their behaviors, how much better we would be as a community and people would heal. So, really, although this was called a suicide prevention workshop, this really the only way to do this properly is we need to really have a general overview of common mental health conditions and learn how to respond. And of course, we'll talk about suicide as well. That's a very difficult topic and the central topic that we're here to discuss tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and put a slideshow on the screen, and hopefully that can be helpful. Anybody at any time that has any questions are welcome to interrupt and ask if they'd like. So an overview of mental health conditions is really critical, as I said, and this is the way we'll be able to know where the person is headed. Unfortunately, many mental health conditions have the outcome causing suicide. Suicide is an unfortunate end of the line of a terrible mental health condition. And so really it's not the suicide that killed them, it's the mental health condition that killed them. So you can't really talk about end of life when someone takes their own life and killing themselves without talking about what led them to that outcome. But before we can even get started, I think we all need to make a self-assessment. Because perhaps in the Jewish community in general, and in Lubavitch as well, which I believe that's the majority of our constituency here on this call today, are from the Lubavitch community. We have this perspective, and usually there's two camps. There's one camp that says that we have Torah, and Torah is Torah's emes, and we have Tanya, and we have Chassidus, and it gives us so many tools of how to cope and how to deal with all kinds of challenges in life, including mental ailments, mental health ailments. So a large section of Tanya discusses, anxiety and depression and how to deal with terrible things that happens in someone's life and how to overcome them, whether it's begashmius or beruchnius. And so all of these, this new age thing, everyone just needs to get a grip with themselves. We don't need doctors. We don't need medicine. We need people to learn Torah. We need people to do mitzvahs, and people are just disengaged and disconnected, and they're not finding meaning in Torah and mitzvahs, and that's the reason why they're suffering. And so therefore, we've lost our way, and the way to go is with Torah. That's kind of like one camp. Another camp, which is common, is you hear from people that Torah is very nice, but this is a serious mental illness. It's a clinical problem. That must be dealt with by medicine, by professionals. And Torah is very nice to have in yeshiva, to have a shir given by a rav, but that's actually going to help you person with their mental health problems and challenges. That's not necessarily so. And the truth is, both are incorrect. And I don't say this on my own uh, positioning. If you look at many of the Rebbe's letters throughout Ignis, and they've been published and be collected in various collections of different Svarim messages in English. They're put out a whole series of WhatsApps once of different responses that the Rebbe gave to people. Pretty consistently, the Rebbe responds to people in a way that is both um, medical and Torah. You have one without the other, it's unsustainable for a yid with a neshama to be able to the organization that's sponsoring this event today is called Neshamos, which is a beautiful name, because the neshama needs to be able to be in sync with the body, and so with the body's medical support and the neshama's spiritual support, we have a healthy body and soul, a healthy outcome, and so we need to have both. Now, of course, that's not surprising. However, I guess what I want, I hope, and challenge everyone here today is that whatever your preconceived notions are, whatever it is that brings you here to this table, and I'm sure people are here for different reasons. Whatever reason that you are here, you have to first, like Rabbi was had to fast so many taniyas in order to learn the other Gemara. You have to be able to be willing to change the way we think. And then afterwards, you can decide if you agree or disagree, or perhaps want to take a different approach. But at least be open to the possibility that there's other possibilities other than what your um, perception is about this topic, and more importantly, about the person that you are concerned about. So often, people are, they get all offended by the way someone behaves, and they think that the person is angry at them or upset at them, or um, that something that happened that caused them to leave the shul, the l'chaim, the farbrengen, the social event, or whatever it is. And really, if we can recognize it, what the person is going through, a whole different set of realities may come to the fore, may rise to the surface. So, if you're willing to open up with new directions and think about possibilities of other outcomes, and so here's, for example, one Ksav Yad of the Rebbe, where a Yossel Weinberg wrote to the Rebbe about a certain Talmud somewhere. It seems like it was from his traveling around that this family had a child who was very successful in school and in high school, and then went to university. In that university, he tried LSD, then unfortunately had a terrible effect on him, and now he is in a mental institution with schizophrenia, and they don't know what to do with him, and they're completely broken. He never responds, a beautiful response explaining what schizophrenia is all about, how the mind is having a fear of something that wants to hurt it, but not because they aren't aware of what's really out there. But the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, therefore, the objective is how do you fix it spiritually? Is with tefillin and properly wearing tefillin, Meshabed Hamayach Va'alev. That the mind shall impact the heart, that there shouldn't be a disconnect between the two, that you shouldn't have these hallucinations that cause the schizophrenia. So here perhaps you can say from this response, you see from the Rebbe clearly, put on tefillin, that's the solution. Here would be another one where somebody wrote to the Rebbe, they wanted to know how to deal with unwanted urges. And the Rebbe said that a person needs to make sure that they're turning their mind away from it entirely, and they should do it with if they have kleptomania, or get angry, or they want to hurt somebody, that they should fill it with something else. And in order to change it, you have to want to really succeed in doing so, and therefore you should do it in two ways. You should realize that it's terribly usher, but also you should see that it should be done according to the dark yarafua kach v'kach, according to the ways of healing, the ways of the medical community. This was with regards to a psychologist that asked how to deal with it. But if you look at Nigris as well, so somebody writes, there are many others with the same thing. Somebody writes that they have this problem. Did ever told them? I'm sure the doctor told you that there's many others that have many similar problems, and the only way to deal with it is to distance your mind from it and not be stuck on it. And therefore, you should do everything you can to fix the situation, mainly checking your mezuzahs and go according to the instructions of your doctors. Where we see again that the Rebbe strongly encourages that there should be both the spiritual objectives of trying to become stronger spiritually, and to become stronger physically by listening to the doctor's advice, the medical community. So let's talk about a little bit about what is mental health. Mental health, it affects a person's thoughts. It affects the person's how they feel, the way they behave, and because of it, it really gives them a very difficult time to do the things that they're supposed to do. And this can be in so many areas, whether it's having a job, having positive relationships. People want to get along with them. They're able to sustain long-term relationships with people, whether we're talking about marriage or we're talking about just friends in the dormitory. That when they're upset, they respond and act respectfully or act in ways that seems to be within reason. That they have practical, realistic goals. That's when someone is in a mental wellness state. Now, all of us, if we live in this world, which I think all of us could say 100% we do, we all have challenges in our life. And everybody has certain parts in their life of where they have to struggle with something in one of these areas. This is the way we live. But then we have to, throughout our lives, that's like sometimes we get a cold, we blow our nose. And many people, all they got to do is just get over the cold and they're doing fine. Sometimes the cold can cause a shalom, maybe it turns into a pneumonia. Now it's gotten more serious. Now it needs to have some medical intervention. Everybody has a different way of how they respond to their challenges. Some people's challenges may be ones that they can handle easily, and some people have challenges that they're having a hard time dealing with them. Sometimes it's the challenge that's huge, that's difficult for the person to handle, or sometimes it may not be so difficult for others, but it's difficult for this person. And so, mental health is our state of mind. Mental health challenges are that we are unsuccessful in living, laughing, and loving. We aren't doing the things that we aren't capable of going through the things that we need to do to live. We aren't capable of going through the things that we need to do to sustain those relationships. And the things that we enjoy doing and we no longer enjoy doing. And if somebody is dealing with those challenges, then they have mental health challenges. So everybody has a mental state. But we have a healthy mental state and an unhealthy mental state. And so the key to a healthy mental state is connection. The best thing one can do in order to be able to help someone else is to stay connected to them. So often I get asked about different situations that other shluchim find themselves in. And really, oftentimes, the best medicine is just to be there, to check in with that person, to send them a text and say, "Hi, how are you doing?" Not allowing them to be in isolation. Isolating is a common cause for mental health challenges because the person who is isolating no longer has those connections. So, us as the community, we can create connections that we don't isolate, let them isolate, as well as for ourselves as well. Because for a healthy person, it's like you have to have a mask on yourself before you put the mask on the other kid. They always tell you on the plane, if you're helping a child, put your mask on first, then help the child. We have to also ourselves. If we isolate ourselves, and the more we become isolated, the more isolating we become, the more challenging it is for mental wellness. So a disruption of any kind of thing is now disrupting the person's mental well-being. And then we end up, unfortunately, with a mental health challenge. Now, what would you think is the first thing that causes the person to have it? What do you think is the what you put? I'd like to have. Let's make this a little bit more interactive here. Is somebody, if you don't mind putting in the chat, um, the chat's disabled. Aha. So that's okay. If you want, you can unmute yourself if they allow you to unmute yourself. If not, I'll just continue going. So, with mental health conditions, oftentimes it starts off very, very young. And think about it this way: imagine somebody has a strep throat that needs to be treated with antibiotics, and they never.
Lazaroff.
Yes.
Oh, I guess the audio's off. The on. Great. I was going to chat you, but the chat's disabled. I wanted to ask you in one of the previous screens, you had a whole list of things that are the profile of the person who's mentally healthy. So
Sure.
the question I had was, what if that's it? That's great. What if the client you have can do all of that, but reports that it's only with an effort, that spontaneously they really are not like that, but they make a conscious effort due to whatever pressures they have to function this way. Where do we put him on the spectrum?
So, a mental health professional, I am not. However, it seems to me that every single human puts in efforts. On the flip side of Agra, according to how much effort we put in, that's going to be the success. And so it's perhaps an erroneous position for us to believe that the person will succeed in their wellness of their life without effort. And that's why people perhaps are so frustrated because they look at their neighbor and their neighbor seems to have such a great life without any effort. And I have to put in all this effort to succeed. Well, that's why you're human. Since when? I think that everyone's answer somebody. When did you have a contract with the Abishter that you're not supposed to have a difficult life? Like, since when? That's what life is about. Life is a struggle. So as long as a person is able to perform their duties every single day, and it's not altering their mental wellness, it's not considered altered mental wellness if they're able to live, laugh, and love. Those are easy ways of thinking about the three things. To live, which means to do the things they have to do every day. To live, make parnasa, to make a living, to go to school, to do whatever thing a person needs to do. To laugh, which is all the things that you love to do. All of a sudden, you don't like doing them anymore. That's perhaps an altered mental state. And to love, which is to have relationships that can be sustained and last. And it's not all now. Doesn't cause a person doesn't make parnasa. Doesn't cause a person is not enjoying the things they usually enjoy. Doesn't cause a person is not having a happy, healthy marriage or is not getting along with their classmates. Doesn't mean they have a mental problem. What it means is that there is something going on that's challenging it for some reason. It may be the mental wellness is being challenged and needs to have a refuah, needs to have a healing. And if it have a healing, you'll be. Thank you very much for that question. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So imagine somebody has a strep throat, and as a young child, they have the strep throat. They're supposed to use their antibiotics, and they don't take care of it. And as time goes on and they get older, you know what ends up happening? They say, I believe, that strep throat, untreated strep throat, um, can end up killing the person's kidneys. You know what happens when they have no kidneys? The person may die. And so sometimes the mental health condition is very detected very, very early on. But you know what? The average person in America, how long it takes them from when they first consider the first realization that there is a symptoms of mental health condition that they have until they actually get treated? 20 years. That's a crazy number. And so if you consider that there are so many people that are struggling and not getting professional help, of course we have a terrible Magatha in our community because they're not getting help. So we have to know the difference between a sign and a symptom. Because we know the difference between a sign and a symptom, we're able to better recognize earlier on, early signs and symptoms to know how to help people that are struggling. So a sign is something that you can see, and a symptom is something that you can feel. So what makes that challenging? A sign is obvious. You see somebody without a leg trying to cross the street. That's a sign the person is struggling. So you go and you try to help them carry their shopping bags. But a symptom is something that you feel. How will somebody find out how the person is feeling? So you can only do it by observation and by communication. I'm asking questions. So signs and symptoms can be in both categories of physical, behavioral, or psychological signs and symptoms. Because sometimes a person can be so stressed that they're schwitzing. They can be so stressed that they literally feel a pain in their chest. That's okay. Person's feeling sad or frustrated, that's fine. I mean, it's not fine to be frustrated that the frustrating situation is going on, but it's normal behavior for a person to be frustrated, and that's quite okay. When it becomes a problem, when that feeling impacts the ability for the person to work, to do the things they need to do daily, and to do the things that they need to do in order to keep the relationships going. If it's impacting their ability to live, laugh, and love, that's a problem. Now, of course, sometimes the person is dealing with a terrible tragedy, a trauma, God forbid, a death in the family, something like that, and they become withdrawn. They're impacted by it. Or some days, sometimes it happens. A person is not interested in waking up in the morning. They want to sleep in that day because they're very, very tired for an unexplained reason. Sometimes it's for explained reasons. That's not necessarily a mental health condition. Professional help is needed when it's actually a diagnosable problem. Usually, they say a rule of thumb is that if it's without a traumatic event, if it's going on for 2 weeks, that somebody you know is staying in bed and not getting up in the morning, and wanting to stay in bed all day, or uncontrolled crying, where the person, because oftentimes, God forbid, postpartum, women sometimes are very moody, and so they may have some emotional turmoil within, and it's normal to be able to be sad or to be weepy or to be emotionally charged for 2 weeks after birth, but longer than that can be a problem.
Can I
Generally for
interject
2 weeks.
something, Rabbi?
What was that?
Hi, can I just interject something?
Sure.
Thank you. When you talk about being normal to be moody postpartum, I just wanted to share something very important. It's very well known that the baby, the fetus, will get all of the nutrients of the mother, even in terrible conditions like concentration camps and starvation. And it's very well known that people who are depressed are deficient in folic acid. And for those who have the single nucleotide polymorphism, MTHFR, they are less able to convert the synthetic folic acid into the methylated form that's bioavailable. So it's very important to keep in mind, I think, when we're talking about mental illness and when we're talking about depression, that it's important to consider not just dispositional attributions, but situational and nutritional and things that can be done, such as supplementing with methylfolate for people with this SNP or with folic acid, which is less expensive but synthetic. So, and in fact, one abstract said that we know that antidepressants don't always work, and they supplemented the antidepressants in one arm of the study with folic acid, but they did not do a third arm, which people can guess is just folic acid alone, because that would never be published. And the conclusion was that folic acid helps to make the antidepressant more efficacious. So I just wanted to point out that there are very strong financial interests vested in labeling, which is created by a bunch of men sitting around a table and deciding what we're going to call things, and actually healing people, which can be done nutritionally and, like you said, relationally. And I also wanted to mention CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is formed in relationship. And lots of times it's not just that a person can get diagnosed correctly, but they can be misdiagnosed, unfortunately. And whatever has the power to help also has the power to harm. And I think it's very important that the mental health community, as well as the educated consumer, become aware of exactly what you're saying, that it's really about connection. And it's very important to keep that in mind. Like Kobe Mandel's mother in her book, Road to Resilience, on page 19 said that she's convinced that mental health is a function of environment. Because of what was going on there, people can look at that book. It's a very good book. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Raya. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. So, of course, I'm not going to be focusing here on actual on treatments and ways a person can heal, and everybody should go to their mental health professional, Rav, community leader, in person to be able to know how to heal. This is really an overview for a typical person to just be aware of the different kinds of symptoms that we have and that are very common, that are often left untreated and untaken care of in ways that you describe and in many other ways. And therefore they become unfortunately a lot worse, and they could have easily been reversed earlier on if somebody would have noticed. Like, for example, on the subject of postpartum, if we're going to go in that subject a little bit more, oftentimes, the woman herself doesn't know or realize what's going on with herself because she's in this, the state, and she just feels like whatever it is that's bothering her is bothering her. The husband is the one who is aware, but it doesn't know how to deal with it, and is not aware that this is actually a very common situation that happens after birth, postpartum, and that it can very easily be treated and taken care of and healed in ways that you described. Thank you, Ryan, and in other ways as well. That she should be able to heal and not, God forbid, have long-term mental illness because of the greatest gift of having another beautiful child. And so this is another somewhat of a crisis of the lack of knowledge or awareness in what postpartum depression looks like. Not everything is postpartum depression. Postpartum is a reality. Baruch Hashem, it's a beautiful thing to be postpartum, which is after a baby is born. It's postpartum depression that can be very debilitating and difficult for families. And so those are the types of signs and symptoms we should be looking for to see how we can do it. If the mother doesn't want to hold the baby, is not feeling attachment, and various other types of detachment type of connections to people that she usually loves, that she's now doesn't love. Those things, of course, sometimes this marital disharmony that can cause this, and that's why these are just signs and symptoms, but it needs to be analyzed and recognized. And so if you have a friend or a spouse who is struggling with this, it's important to be aware of this. But probably the biggest issue is my next slide of why people are not getting helped is this big dirty word called stigma. Why do you think it is stigma? So, why are some of the things that people don't get helped? Oftentimes, an argument can be made that it's financial. It costs money. It costs money to go speak to a professional. It costs money to go to a doctor. It costs money to get any kind of medication they may have. I mean, it costs money, God forbid, if they have to be, hospitalized. They may not have proper insurance. It costs money. Financial is definitely a barrier. But the biggest barrier is stigma. What does that mean, stigma? So stigma, people say, "Oh, I don't stigmatize." Stigma starts right here. First of all of you who are here joining this call today, you are here breaking the stigma. Is that it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to talk about this openly, and to be honest about that it's very real in our communities, because research shows that there's actually no difference between social economic communities, whether it's the Jewish community or other communities, in how prevalent mental health conditions are. And you know how many people in America are suffering with a mental health condition? 1 in 5, 20%. So if you think about it, if 20% of people are struggling with a mental health problem challenge, that means if you know more than 5 people, there's a good chance that one of those people are struggling. Statistically, doesn't mean they all are. That doesn't mean that have a certainty. But if you know more than 5 people, which most people from the community, we tend to know a lot of people because we are communities that are connected to each other and we kind of swim in the same fish tank. It's very possible, yeah, you're a neighbor, your family member, someone that you know very well that you never realize that they're struggling so much, maybe actually be struggling. So how do you think it makes them feel when you call somebody Meshuggah? So stigma starts with, first of all, realizing that it's common. Second of all, realizing that there's certain language we have to use. When you call somebody a Meshuggah because they are struggling, the person is totally Meshuggah. That's not a positive word. No one wants to be labeled a Meshuggah. There's other kind of words. Um, the chat is still disabled. Okay. I was gonna put up a whiteboard or a chat box if there's somebody here who can support the system. If that's not possible, that's okay. We'll continue. But there's other words that
Um,
that are what was that? There are other words that people often use. Can anybody here want to mind? You can unmute yourself if you'd like. I see that we allowing unmuting. You can unmute yourself. Other kinds of words that people use to describe people that are dealing with mental health challenges. Crazy.
Crazy, oversensitive.
Yeah. Now, oversensitive is a descriptive, it's not necessarily a label, but there are a lot of very negative ones that we use that describes people that are not necessary at all. And so, breaking stigma is to not speak that way ourselves. For example, another common thing people say is that the person committed suicide. What does the word commit mean? Commit usually means that a person is committed to jail, committed to a hospital, or worse than
Applying to
that,
crime.
committing a crime. And so when we describe suicide as somebody that dies by suicide as committing a crime, that causes a the person to feel like, oh my gosh, I can't share and disclose that I'm thinking about doing a crime. Although according to Alpiteta, it's definitely us at Alpiteta. But when we create stigma that a person can't even talk to somebody else about it, the only way they're going to get out of their hole is by sharing it with someone else, then it becomes very difficult for them to heal. Unfortunately, I had a young man in my community who was a very, very bright young man. He was smart, he was sensitive, he was like tall, and he was a teenager in high school, and he was coming a little bit more withdrawn, very tired, and his family from for were tried to take care of it, brought him in for some, to his doctor. Said, yeah, he's growing, but this child didn't have anybody to talk to about what he was struggling with. And the end result, unfortunately, was that he took his life. It was a terrible tragedy. A 15-year-old boy. He found no other way of how to get out of his pain than by ending his life. One of the ways studies show, when they ask people who actually tried and unsuccessfully and asked them what made them do it, one of the driving factors of people not getting help is they don't want to be stigmatized. And so, if we're talking about suicide head on, the biggest issue we must face is the subject of stigma. People don't want to be labeled because they may impact shidduchim in the family. People don't want to be labeled because they don't want anybody else to know about it, because then the person's going to lose their job. And sometimes it is true that people get fired because of their mental health condition, and that's unfair. If they're able to perform their duties, just because they have something going on in their life is not it would be an inappropriate outcome. If they're not able to fulfill their duties, they have to fulfill their duties. There should be some sort of, this person is ill. Imagine somebody has cancer. Imagine somebody has chas v'shalom, machla. What happens typically when they come out of the hospital? Everybody comes running. They're gonna bring them dinner. They're gonna take their kids. They're gonna babysit for them. They're gonna take them on trips. They're gonna make big concerts for them, and they become, of course, celebrated in order to give them the strength to be able to overcome their illness. Because we all know that the way illness works is not only the medical help; we also have to have the emotional help and support of the community. What typically happens when someone is dealing with a mental health challenge? Person is released from the hospital, hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. Oftentimes the phone is silent. Oftentimes there's no one they can talk to. We, as a community, can do a lot better in this. We certainly can. And it starts right here. Because if 1 in 5 people are struggling, then that means 20% are dealing with this. And so the community is critical in being a support for the person to be able to heal. But sometimes we can look around and we see certain moments that are risk factors that can cause the outcome that would be negative, and that would be, somebody who's dealing with domestic abuse or having a challenge with having children, a terrible trauma of some sort, a terrible car accident a person may have, even if it's not necessarily objective trauma, but to that person, this was a traumatizing event. That something happened to them that was to them so overwhelming or so upsetting, even if it may not be to you or to most others, that can be something that can be a driving factor for their mental um, altered state. So let's talk about some of the disorders. The main disorder that causes an outcome of suicide and the most prevalent disorder is mood disorders. And in mood disorders, there's people always think about depression, but there's various levels of depression. It's okay to, like I said, it's okay to feel sad. I feel depressed today. That's not clinically depressed. And there's major depression, and that's not sadness. Um, and it can occur to anybody at any age and at any stage. Somebody who has never been depressed can be very depressed in their senior years. Even young people and very young people can be very depressed in a way that can chas v'sholom lead, like I said, like I illustrated before, to depression, to suicide. But sometimes it's also seasonal. A lot of people are not familiar with this, but some people, they only seasonally have depression. So a couple seasons a year they're okay, and one season a year they're not. Um, the postpartum depression is a common one, and then there's something called bipolar, which is that sometimes there are two extremes. One extreme is that sometimes they're extremely effective, highly driven, almost manic, and sometimes they are completely depressed and in the dumps and in the hole. This is the most common disorder and the most common cause for the outcome, chas v'shalom, of suicide. Then there is anxiety disorder. So anxiety disorder is where a person has serious anxiety in a way that debilitates them. Sometimes there's a lot of things to be scared of, like, sometimes spiders are very scary. as are roaches and a mouse. If you're a mouse in your house, it's very scary. And it's okay to have anxiety about the mouse that just ran through your house, and that's it's upsetting. But the question is, how exaggerated is it? How long does it last? A panic attack is where a person literally it freezes them up. They feel completely um, uh, immobile. They can't move. They can't do anything. Where they're completely in a panic. A panic attack can look a lot like an allergic reaction, or a heart attack, where the person is sweating, is having a hard time breathing, and feels like they're getting out of control. Post-traumatic stress disorder is something that is persistent, that constantly happens, and a person who has intense social anxiety, they can be in a room and they feel like they're the most alone person there, and they just can't handle being there, and they have to leave. So the behaviors that are here and the symptoms that are here are all listed on the right side. And there's ways of how a person can calm themselves down. And so if you see somebody having a panic attack, the best way is to ask them if they've had this before and how did they cope, and see if you can help them, guide them through whatever it is that they need to do in order to overcome their anxiety they're having now. And as we go through these disorders, you may come up in your mind different people that you know that may be struggling with these things. And these labels are not as important as it is the awareness of different kinds of behaviors that can disable the person's ability to live, laugh, and love. But the objective should be that um, we should not uh, I guess label the person that we notice with these signs and symptoms, because that's of course that's only generating stigma. The objective should be that we should become more aware of what these things are about. But more than that, it's also if we realize the different areas where a person disorder where different disorders are in, we then know how to help the person, help them get better. And so if you have somebody in your family or yourself or someone else that you know that is struggling, right, this may be triggering that you feel like these different descriptions are difficult to handle, and so it's so important to check in with yourself to ensure that you're okay. So in eating disorders, there is anorexia. Anorexia is where a person doesn't eat at all, doesn't eat to an extreme. This is a very, very dangerous disorder. The statistics of this is extremely troubling. They say that 5% of people with diagnosed anorexia will attempt suicide in their life. Not just have suicidal ideation, but actually will attempt. That means 1 in 20 people. Is that this is some studies show even up to 20%. This is a very, very serious disorder, and it doesn't have to get to that point of where the person actually becomes a disorder. If we can be honest about and support people in their realization of what's important in life and body image and healthy eating, we don't have to get to the point of chas v'sholom, these kind of terrible outcomes. Substance use disorders is a whole gamut of it is when a person is completely um is completely reliant on on their um on their substances in order to cope. I mean, it's okay for a person to appreciate coffee. Um, the that would be a substance that a person really must have in order to be able to function. But does it inhibit their ability to do the things that they have to do? And so there are highly functional people that are addicted to substances, and that's often a common defense, and especially in Lubavitch, perhaps, which most of the community here, which I'm talking to, it looks like is Lubavitch, as you know, there's perhaps a lot of mashka that goes on, and I'm not necessarily saying we get rid of the mashka, but we do need to realize the terrible impact and destruction it could have with these substances. And when a person has the inability to control themselves, even if they say they can, but when they actually are put to the challenge, they can't. That's a substance use disorder. And if the only way they can feel okay with the substance, that's not that's not okay either. Now, there's something called the non-suicidal self-injury (NSSI). self-harm is not that the person is suicidal, and this often gets confused. If a person is hurting themselves, it doesn't mean that they are trying to kill themselves. If a person is taking drugs, it doesn't mean they're trying to overdose. That's why it would be called accidental overdose. Or if a person is cutting themselves, they're doing it in order to be able to release the tension that they may have within them, in order to be able to feel better. But then there's an underlying mental health condition that's untreated. They have to be able to make themselves feel better. So there's a cycle of self harm, of where they constantly need to do something in order to be able to get over their guilt or shame, they have negative thoughts, and then you have this terrible cycle of self injury. Now, what can be often that could look very similar to non-suicidal self-injury is suicide itself. And what I'm going to talk about now is, of course, very sensitive. If you find yourself having tender reactions to whatever we're going to talk about now, I encourage you to reach out to whoever your support system is in order to deal with it, and don't just suffer quietly on your own if you can't handle it. Before we carry on, somebody's asking in the chat, there's a difference between the terms mental health and emotional health. I don't believe so. I believe it's the same thing. The mental state and emotional state is connected to each other. I may be wrong. Again, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy who's a Rav who answers a lot of shilas and deals with a lot of community members, and having awareness of mental health conditions allows me to be able to be a better person. I guess that's kind of what I want to impart here today, is that you don't need to be a mental health professional to be a peer suicide, a peer community member, to be able to support people. That they should not they shouldn't struggle. So some people think that certain people are more certain classes of people are likely for suicide. A big myth is people think that they can't. If you ask somebody about suicide, you're gonna put the idea in their head. This is not true. Research has shown people have tried to kill themselves or were suicidal, that the moment that they were asked, "Are you considering killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide?" They felt like a big weight was lifted off their shoulders. They now shared the biggest secret in the world, and now they're able to finally feel better. And some of you may have experienced this. We had a young man who was always coming around, and I spoke with him, and I really recognized that he has signs and symptoms of mental unwellness. I asked him if he's considering hurting himself, to which he said no. I asked him if he's considering killing himself, to which he said yes. Now, why do you think there's a difference between, are you considering hurting yourself versus killing yourself? Because a person who hurts themselves is not trying to kill themselves. And the person who kills themselves is not trying to hurt themselves. Actually, they feel like, I'm going to feel a lot better. So they're not hurting themselves. So he said, no, I'm not. I don't want to hurt myself. Yes, he is thinking about killing himself. And that moment that he shared that information, you could see like a weight unloaded from his shoulders, that he was just shared the biggest secret, but now he felt so much better just sharing it with someone else. Somebody's asking if a self-starvation of anorexia is a type of simulated suicide to make themselves like the living dead. It's suicide is a terrible outcome of a mental health condition. Death is what the out result is of suicide. People that die from anorexia, that's not suicide. They're dying from anorexia, which is that their bodies are not getting the nutrients it needs. And the terrible, the unfortunate outcome is that they die from the anorexia, like the person died in suicide, also may be driven by where 5% is from the anorexia, where they decided to kill themselves, and that's how they died. But it can be also that a person dies from their body shutting down from not eating. So the warning signs, when you see somebody who's having signs or symptoms, they're talking about dying, they're giving away all their things, dramatically changing their moods. Where before they were like for a couple of months, perhaps they're very sad, all of a sudden they're happy, everything is fine. Those can be sometimes symptoms that show you that there's something going on and that it's important to have the conversation. It's important to stop and ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself? You have to ask it directly. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you thinking of harming someone else? If they answer yes to any of these questions, this is a big problem. Now the question is, how emergency is this? You should ask them next. If they say yes, do you have a plan of how you're going to do it? And if they say that yes, they have a plan, that they have, let's say, a knife, a gun, a medication, or whatever, this is now a medical emergency. And you have to do everything you can to stop this person and to keep them safe. And it's literally like a situation where you have to break Shabbos, which is keeping Shabbos to drive somebody to the hospital. You have to do whatever you can, whether it's whatever needs to be done in order to get this person into professional help. And you should not leave their side. And you may not be the right person to help them. You may be the person who has been the expert observer to realize it. You may need to bring somebody else to be that support. The professional helps to be that support. There's something called 988, the suicide prevention help hotline. You can call it. You can text it. They can be a support. They have professionals manning those lines at all times. You can also call for the mental health team, response team, to respond to the call. I don't know how it is. I know it seems like most people here are living in New York. In Houston, the Houston Police Department have an entire department because they think they get a huge amounts of calls that are really mental health related. So they have a very big department in the police department of police officers that respond to calls which are trained in mental health, and the response is not with their guns out blaring, but their response is in a much more appropriate way of approaching a person who's dealing with a mental health crisis. But you have to do everything in your power to help this person. If this person shared with you that they are thinking about killing themselves and they actually have a plan, it's an emergency. Immediately call for help. I'm unfamiliar if Atzola in New York has a department that deals with this, but this is a critical thing. So if a person is in crisis and suicidal, it means that they said yes, they want to kill themselves, and yes, they have a plan. You call the 911 mental health division. You stay with the person until appropriate help arrives. If the person says they don't have a plan, they don't plan on killing themselves, that's non-crisis. Now, what we need to do is encourage them to do the two things: professional help and self-help. Professional help is they should figure out who they're going to see professionally to help them out with their problem. And that may not be you. And also to figure out what kind of things can they do to help them out. So like just 2 nights ago, we got a knock on our door at our Chabad house. A girl showed up that we know. She's completely distraught about what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. She sat and talked to my wife. Said that her mother saw that my wife is is certified in mental health first aid, and that she may be a person to talk to. She doesn't know how to deal with her situation or how she's feeling, and that she's in terrible anxiety and she can't function and doesn't know what to do. So I'm walking her through it. My wife shared with her that if you ever feel like you're out of control, think about how you're going to help someone else. I can't help somebody else. That's what I mean. You can't reach them, tell them. Reach them, tell them to support the people of Eretz Yisrael. Oh, that you can do. So they read some Tillim together. They gave some stalker together. And encourage her to talk to her doctor. She was scared that she's not sure if she needs to go to the hospital or not. She's not sure. It's okay. Normalize it. Make it where it's okay if a person feels like they are so out of control that they are concerned about their mental well-being. It's okay for them to feel like sometimes they have to be hospitalized. She asked her if she was thinking of suicide. She hesitated and answered no. Not really. She doesn't want to take her life. So now this is a very serious issue, but it's not an emergency. So somebody's asking you, how do you ensure that you're not breaking their trust by getting help? Meaning, if you feel they betrayed them, might that make things worse in the long run once this blows over? The answer is, in short, no. That would be an inappropriate response. Because if you do break their trust, you may save their life. If you don't break their trust, that may, chas v'sholom, l'chmona l'slan, bring to them ending their life. And we do everything in our power. Only 3 avedas we don't do in order not to save a life, and breaking a person's trust is not one of them. And it's not going to make it worse in the long run. Overwhelmingly, people who survive attempted suicide, or people who go through these very difficult moments and then end up on the other side of healing, they say that this person saved my life. So someone's asking, how can they do it in a way that feels supported? So the way you do it is, first of all, you don't do it in a rush. Second of all, you need to listen. And also you need to say the helpful things to say that doesn't make the person feel judged. You need to use helpful terms, which we'll talk about in a minute. So someone asks, what about people who don't want to get help? If they don't want to get help, they don't want to get help. But if they are a risk of hurting themselves or someone else, that's even if they don't want to get help, we are allowed to, both medically and ethically, to force them to get help by calling the mental health crisis team to respond. If they're at emergency, that they can hurt themselves or others, that's an emergency. So let's look at these 8 things. There are these are different 8 things, and some of these things are helpful, and some of these things are unhelpful. So in answer to the person who asked about how can you do it in a way that they feel supported, the most critical thing is the approach. And what kind of helpful things are you going to say? So, I am concerned about you. That's empathetic. That's helpful. Oftentimes, though, instead of saying I'm concerned about you, people say something similar or in some other words. You'll get over it. You just got to ignore it and get on with your life. Although that may be true of what you're thinking, that's not the helpful thing to say. Number 3 is a common myth. When a person, they hear somebody struggling, they say, I understand and know exactly what you're going through. That happened to me 2 years ago. So on the one hand, that sounds like, wow, well, the person knows you can be empathetic with their problem because you dealt with the same problem. And anybody that has dealt with a problem knows and shares that when people tell them that I know exactly how you're feeling, they feel so dismissed about their feelings. Because the person says that they lost their father, and the other person says, yeah. The person says, yeah, they also lost their father. Yeah, but your father was not my father. And so you don't know exactly what the person is going through. You may feel like you can understand. Now, what is appropriate is to bring it into conversation to say that when I had the same thing happen to me 2 years ago, this is how I dealt with it. But not that I know how you're feeling. Another helpful thing to say in order to feel support is to ask them if they've ever spoken to anyone else about it before. Oftentimes, if they have a history of struggling, they may share, yeah, they have a therapist, they have a doctor, they don't like them, they stop taking their medication, or they don't like the doctor that they have, they don't appreciate their therapist. And so asking them, have you spoken to anyone about this before, is a positive way. You just got to face up to reality. Life is not a bed of roses. That may be true. You may be thinking that, but that's not. You shouldn't be saying that. Number 6, again dismissive. Here we go again. When are you gonna get your life back in order? How long have you been feeling like this? Good or bad? That's a good way to ask. Because if a person tells you how long you're feeling, they may say it's only been a day. Okay. Not suicidal is an emergency if they say they have a plan and they want to kill themselves now. But if they're talking about the general depression, signs and symptoms that we described until now, and they've been feeling like this for 2-3 days, okay, check in with them and see if after 7 days are they feeling better. 14 days are they feeling better? If after 14 days and they're still not feeling better, then we have a problem. You'll feel differently tomorrow. Unhelpful. Because you don't know that they'll feel differently tomorrow. So somebody's asking here in the chat, how can you help someone who is in a situation they can't escape? Abusive environment, family against therapy, etc. I gotta say, the answer to that question, I don't know. Because how can I help somebody who's in an abusive environment get out of their abusive environment? I can be a support for them. I can give them strength to be able to withstand the abusive environment, to withstand the family that's against therapy. And if it's a child under 18, it's just not. It's much more complex of how to deal with both abuse and family against therapy, and so how to help them is much more complex and much more difficult. And every case I would say is completely different. In my experience in the last 23 years doing this work, is that every single case has its own list of situations and challenges, whether it's financial, familial, perspectives, the background the person comes from. And so to say that there's one way of how to help someone or even give a general direction, I think, I don't know. On the spot, I can't think of anything specific to give as a direction of how to help with that way.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I can't post the chest disabled. I don't know how people are asking questions. So I just wanted to mention something that was discussed earlier about the nasty things that people say, like Michigan are crazy. And I suggested too sensitive, and you said that's just a descriptor. But in the context of unhelpful things to say, and in the context of this question, I think it's important to bring up narcissistic abuse as well as covert narcissistic abuse. So a person might look wonderful and they might look very charitable and be very stingy and abusive at home. And a person might say to others that they're too sensitive, that they don't know what they're talking about, that they're always complaining, that they're so needy and they're such a bother, and they might be neglecting them and gaslighting them and not meeting their real needs. So I would be cautious about saying that too sensitive is just a descriptor. And I think that we need to be a little bit more aware maybe of these kinds of things like narcissistic abuse, especially covert narcissistic abuse. And there are many people who are in relationships with people who have narcissism, not just self-centered, but really cannot take responsibility for themselves and are gaslighting and hurting other people, even covertly. And many times these people who are being abused, I know several cases, they become schizophrenic and they lose themselves. So because it's kind of like being in a cult, and it's very insidious. So I just would caution about that a little bit.
Absolutely. It's a terrible situation for a person to be in a domestic abusive situation with a narcissist and not being able to handle themselves or deal with it. But these are the helpful things to say, and these are the unhelpful things to say. And so when the person was asking earlier about how does one support, this is the way one can show support, is by saying the helpful things that ends up supporting them through their things. So we say professional help. A lot of people say, "Oh, I know a psychiatrist." Not every psychiatrist is the right psychiatrist for this mental health condition. Not every doctor is a doctor who is appropriate for it. Not every patient needs to go to the hospital. Some people go through outpatient. There's different types of professional help. There's many types of therapies. Sometimes it's medications, sometimes it's support groups. There's all kinds of things. So professional help is a really big arch of things that a person can go to for professional help. And so it's important to find the right professional help. In the tri-state area, there is something called reliefhelp.org as a resource. They're very good at doing triage. So they bring the person in, or a family member can sign up to discuss what the trouble is, and they will connect the person to the right type of professional help. according to their reality, whether it's something that they could afford, can't afford, the kind of issues that they're challenged with, etc. Not every therapist knows how to deal with substance use. There's some people that are specifically certified to deal with substance use disorders, as an example. Somebody has question number 4, helpful or unhelpful. Question number 4 is helpful. It allows you to open up the conversation, to allow them to share what their history is with this situation, and to see if they can go back to the way what helped you then. What did you do then at that time to feel better? If someone is suicidal and you're not present but on the phone, when you know they're safe enough that you can leave them. If they're suicidal, it's not unsafe in an emergency way if they don't have an immediate plan. So you can leave them. But if they're suicidal and they have a plan, then you stay on the phone with them until you can, on the other line, call professional help and get professional help to their door, wherever they are, if you can figure out where they are. I had a shliach after taking my mental health first aid. He called me up that he has a guy who he's very concerned about. He doesn't know what to do, and he gave me the signs and symptoms that he had, and I told him, well, you got to find this guy because it sounds like he is in a mental health crisis. He went looking for him or trying to find him, track him down. And that was like 2 hours later, and it was too late. The man shot himself. But Baruch Hashem, the man survived it. And afterwards was so thankful for the shliach for reaching out and being a support for him through that whole very, very challenging time in his life. So that's all mental wellness. What's components of mental wellness is that we have to have all of these facets of the mind and the body. And of course, the spiritual, which is what we have in Chassidus and in Torah v'chulu. And in the person's environment, all needs to be supportive for the person to be a healthy person. So like when someone shared earlier about a person dealing with a very abusive environment and a narcissist, it's very difficult to stay mentally well. If a person has all these things that support them, but they can't find a job, this is a problem. That financial stress can cause a person to have mental wellness. Mental wellness is really not just one thing. We need all these different components to support people through their mental wellness. And the way this is able to succeed is a person needs to think about themselves positively. And when we have our mindset of not only thinking about myself, but thinking about others, and not saying why I can't, but figuring why I can, and trying to find things that motivate rather than undermine, then the person is more successful in having all the different areas of where they have the components of mental wellness. So the self-talk of mindset is very important. And therefore, those who find themselves in groups of people, whether it's organizational self-care, whether you have coworkers, or those who are in schools, if you have other students in your seminaries or in your high schools or yeshivas, or those who are in businesses of various sorts, or whatever a person finds themselves in, what it means is to keep an eye on each other. And if you realize somebody is having systemic disability in being able to live, laugh, and love, reach out to them, connect to them, encourage the person to take a break. People think sometimes they have to work all the time and they can never take a vacation. They can never find any break. That's not okay. It's okay to have to you have to have a safe space to be able to heal yourself. If you don't put on your own oxygen mask, how can you put on someone else's? And so a person has to always remind ourselves as well, and I'm talking to all of us now, everybody who's here on this call, that it's not selfish to take breaks, and the needs of the people that you serve, if you're in community leadership like I am, is not more important than your own needs and your own well-being. And working all the time is not necessarily going to make things better. And sometimes you're not the right person to deal with and to respond to the person's mental unwellness. You may be the noticer, and you may be the one who's able to be there to support, but maybe there's another friend. Maybe there's another community leader. Maybe there's somebody else that'll be better equipped to talk to this person because of their relationship with them or because of their mindset. And so that's the end of my presentation here. I'm happy to take any other questions.
So you said before harming yourself sorry, someone thinking about harming themselves versus killing themselves is different.
Yes, a person can harm themselves because they want to release tension. There's something called cutting, or another common is hair pulling, where a person, or sometimes it's even nail biting, but it's not necessarily harming themselves. A person bites their nails until their fingers get infected. That's not harming themselves. That's to relieve tension. The person is full of tension and needs to relieve that tension, so they cut themselves. So a common symptom can be that they're always wearing long sleeves to cover their arms. You may see cuts on them. They, I don't know, the various ways of how this gets realized by others, but that is self harm, and self harm is not necessarily a crisis, although it may become a crisis. If somebody is cutting themselves and cut themselves on their arm and hits a major vein, they could bleed out and die. But it doesn't mean they were trying to kill themselves. If somebody is addicted to substances, that's self harm. That's hurting themselves. But doesn't mean that they're trying to kill themselves if they overdose. It may be an accidental overdose. They wanted to feel better and they took another pill and they died. But they didn't want to die. They just wanted to hurt themselves. They wanted to cope by hurting themselves. Non-suicidal self-injury is not the same as suicide.
It's like what if let's say someone, I don't know, like hit themselves hard, like to inflict pain, and was like thinking, like has suicidal thoughts, but like nothing, nothing more than that, like no cutting, no marks.
If they hit themselves hard, that hitting themselves hard and doing this in a repeated basis, not just one time, they're doing this consistently, that's a symptom of an underlying trouble that's going on, typically depression, that's causing them to want to hurt themselves. If they're having suicidal ideation, that they perhaps would rather not live, they they're not so sure, perhaps they want to kill themselves. It's not an emergency. But if it's been left untreated and untaken care of and unsupported by us, the community, and by for whether professional help or chassidus or any other thing that the person needs to do in order to support, then it will probably get worse. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the community, it has gotten worse. Somebody wrote here in Florida, there is a law, Baker Act, that someone can file paperwork for involuntary examination of the mental health facility. Because the sheriff department legal obligation to come in unannounced and enter by force, take someone to the inpatient ward for 70 hours. How is this legal? It's legal because the person has shared that they are a danger to themselves or to others. And just like if there was I not to compare the two, but just to compare it in its how serious it is. If somebody shared with you that they have a gun and they want to walk into a shul, Rahman al-Islam, and shoot a bunch of people, is that not an emergency that deserves their door to be kicked down and to take them to save the people? Here you're saving the person from themselves. They want to kill themselves. We have to do everything in our power to save them. If they share that they want to kill themselves, it's irresponsible of us to allow them to kill themselves. It's a kind of nefesh. It's a cook nefesh. So they take the person by force with no warning. These publics have no decency at all, no access to the outside world, no contact with anyone, no kosher food. Well, yeah, I mean, it would. Of course, it's always better. It's always better if it's guided by family members that choose the facility where the person goes to. But sometimes we have a responsibility as family members and as community members and as support systems of people to help get them into the medical support they need so that they chas v'shalom shouldn't end their life. Rabbi Feiglin, are you still here? Okay. I guess I'm going to be ending this call, it seems.
You're the boss.
What was that?
You're the boss.
Okay. Very
Hi.
good. So,
Hi.
thank you everybody for your time tonight. Remember that ending stigma starts right here. Thank you for being here. If everybody else is watching, going to be watching afterwards, we should make a difference in our communities. Every once in a while, I schedule a mental health first aid course. It's an 8-hour course, which is much more deeper dive into all of these subjects. And I encourage anyone to join. We have to do it separately for men and for women, and it's much more interactive and much more learning based and experience based. And so I encourage whenever if you ever see it publicized anywhere to join that course.
Hi, my name is Mayor.
I'm just
presenting the choice.
curious. This
Oh, can't really hear this far. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mayor Nu. I'm here representing Neshamos. Rabbi Lazaroff, thank you very much for coming on tonight. And everybody else for joining. As was mentioned many times tonight, mental health and suicidality is really something that we can tackle only as a community. Everybody has their circles that they're in touch with. And like Rabbi Lazaroff mentioned, what works for one person won't necessarily work for all. And I know that Baruch Hashem at Neshamos, we've had the merit of being involved with dozens, if not hundreds of cases. And in each one, it was very, very important for us to find the key individual that could get through to the person in despair and danger. And that really, if we were able to identify that person, that really made all the difference. So everybody here is an ambassador to their corners, as well as to everybody else in this call. Thank you very, very much. This is the beginning of a big campaign of awareness and most of all support for each other. And like we say, that when the Eibishter sees that we're supporting each other, that's when he comes and he rests within us, and then we all feel supported by him himself, who is the greatest support of all. So thank you very much all for coming. Thank you very much, Rabbi Lazaroff. And we should have a great summer and only know of good things.
Thank you.